Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for attending this Page Executive webinar on Let's Talk About Race. Delighted to have partnered with VERCIDA for this occasion. I will be your host for today. I'm Sheri Hughes, the UK Diversity and Inclusion Director at Page Group. I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. So I'll just start to my left. I know it's probably different for all of you panelists. So Fiona, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Sheri. Good morning, everybody. My name is Fiona Daniel. I run my own business, and I'm really pleased to be here to talk about this lovely topic that I'm very passionate about, and that's all I will say at this point. Thank you.
Plenty of time to get into the juicy stuff. Yes, thanks, Fiona. Morning, Sheela.
Good morning. Good morning, Sheri. Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you very much. I've been in investment banking for 15 years, and as many people will know, that's very much a very homogeneous environment. And the reason I'm here today is I would like to talk about some of my experiences in that very homogeneous environment. I mentor quite a few young women who are also either in financial services or interested in moving into financial services, and I really feel that over the last 15 years, when I listen to them, nothing has really changed, and I would like to see some change. And I'm hoping that by sharing some of my experiences today, that some of those listening will start to go away and think about how their organisations are looking at all forms of diversity, but particularly racial diversity.
Super, thanks, Sheela. Our partner from VERCIDA, Dan, good morning.
Morning, Sheri. I think this is, I can't remember how many webinars we've done on various topics, but I'm really pleased to be involved in this one, actually. My first job many years ago, when I left university, was actually working in race equality. I was actually working in a tiny charity in Nottingham, looking at issues of black exclusion in school. And it's actually interesting because in preparation for today, I actually phoned a friend and said, what are the stats around black exclusion in school? About 25 years ago, black young boys were 5 times much more likely to be permanently excluded than white kids. And the stats hardly shifted. And I think that's really interesting, and it says something in terms of progress or lack of in society. In terms of VERCIDA, we are based in London, but we operate globally, and our role is to support organisations on a whole range of diversity and inclusion issues. But race inclusion is a particular passion of mine, actually.
Super. Thanks, Dan. And Ahmed, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ahmed Farooq, and I am Chief Financial Officer of Wesleyan Assurance Society. Like Sheela, very much within financial services, and unfortunately, like Sheela, quite rare to be a person of colour who occupies a senior position. So thank you for the invitation today. Looking forward to it.
Thank you to all of you for coming. I think this is going to be a fantastic discussion today. I mean, not least because it is a topic that is everywhere, but I think we all feel very passionately about making sure that we help influence those conversations and really bring it to life and help people make the next step in regards to race equality and so on. So let's just kick off straight away. Ladies, I think well, I'll start with you, Fiona, actually. Why do you think people do find it uncomfortable to talk about race?
I think there's a number of reasons. So when I speak to I suppose people of colour, the things that they tell me, so I try and summarise. I think one is a fear of saying the wrong thing, and they don't want to be seen as upsetting somebody. I think the other is a place of, I always think of the human nature being about survival, that flight and fear. And so I think when this conversation tends to come up, I think it's a defense mechanism, as I'm not the bad person, it's not me. So it can also be seen as being personal, a personal attack, and it actually isn't. But I think that's the natural kind of things that people start thinking about. I'm not a bad person, I'm not a racist person. No one likes to see themselves as that, but there are things that are going on in around us that we do need to be aware of. So I think that doesn't help either. And I think the other thing is just I think people think it's such a huge topic, it actually then becomes quite a scary topic then to actually delve into. And I think the key thing for me about, all of this is just the importance of just listening, really, and just feel the fear and do it anyway, because I think the more we don't talk about it, what tends to then happen is that people then go silent. And I just love this quote that I came across, about a couple of years ago, which was, leaders that don't listen will soon surround themselves with people that don't speak. And that's what will happen. The more we don't talk about something, the less we're ever going to, be able to move the dial and really understand what's going on. So I think there's a couple of those issues around people as individuals that need to understand, well, what is it about this subject that makes me feel uncomfortable, and then address it that way as well. But I would say they're the key things that I tend to come across, is that whole fear, saying the wrong thing, but not actually sometimes thinking about, well, it's uncomfortable for the individuals on the receiving end of racism. So, we're uncomfortable with it, but we need to get you to get comfortable with it pretty quickly so that we can talk about it.
Why is it okay to be uncomfortable?
Yeah, exactly.
And not everybody else,
Yeah.
have to move it on.
Absolutely, because in the meantime, while we're waiting for people to get comfortable, these challenges are still going on.
Yeah, it's not stopping, is it?
No.
Fear just a lot. Ahmed, you mentioned in your introduction actually about being the only or a very small number of people of colour in your career to date. What's your view on this?
Yeah, for me and in my personal experience, I think there's been two predominant reasons. Firstly, and not just about race as well, but race, religion, and culture, or all three of those aspects. Firstly, similar to Fiona, I agree that despite a desire to understand, there's a fear of offending. And I've experienced that personally quite recently. As a Muslim, we went through Ramadan, and it was all over the press how Ramadan was in lockdown, but yet in the workplace, very few questions about it, which I actually would have welcomed. And secondly, I actually think I have come across people having the wrong attitude of assuming race, religion, and culture is not relevant in the workplace. I think that was very dominant many years ago, certainly when I started in my career, but it's still quite prevalent now. And that's despite the various studies which demonstrate that diversity actually improves the workplace and improves results as well. So yeah, two reasons: a fear of offending and the wrong attitude of assuming it's not relevant.
I think we will certainly be exploring that a bit more as to exactly how relevant it is and how everybody can benefit from it. I'm going to come across to you, Dan and Sheela, now about recent events which have been a huge catalyst to this conversation rising up the ranks. Why do you think the recent events in America specifically have made this such a prominent topic for UK business leaders? Dan, if I might just come to you first on that, actually.
Sure. I guess it's interesting. I think on one level, I think the interesting thing to say is it's slightly random and it's slightly coincidental, because obviously we're all aware of George Floyd, but actually when we look at it, the truth of the matter is, African Americans are quite frankly murdered by the police day in, day out, and I think it just created this kind of snowball effect. So I don't think it's a one-off incident which has triggered something. I think it's just kind of been a bit of a spark. I think what's also happened though is I remember being in the US a couple of years ago when white supremacists were marching in Charlottesville, and President Trump made a number of tweets. His famous tweet was, there's problems on both sides. And I thought what was really fascinating at that point was Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, tweeted out and said, actually, the president's views don't align to my values and they don't align to the values of Apple. And then what we seen was a bit of a snowball effect from CEOs from a lot of American corporates. And that was quite unique at the time, because a lot of corporates tend to say, these are social issues and we don't want to get involved in all of that. But I think what business leaders are finding is that you can't not do that, because what's happening is in that context, your black colleagues are coming into work the following day with all sorts of emotions, and it's just the craziest idea to suggest that we'll just leave those emotions outside and they're not in work. And I think we, on the positive, we have seen a real shift with leaders saying, okay, we do need to respond to that. And I think what we're now seeing is this kind of global trend where there's a recognition that we have to connect inside and outside together, that we're not robots and we can't automatically switch off. And I actually think it's really good that CEOs and other leaders are having conversations now with their black colleagues and saying, how are you feeling? You know, what's going on for you? And you can apply that to lots of other instances as well, actually. So, you know, a number of years ago, there was a shooting in a nightclub where, well, I'm not really sure what the term is, but somebody who was clearly not stable basically shot a whole bunch of members of the LGBT community. And again, at that instance, what was really interesting, there was hardly any noise from organizational leaders. And so when their LGBT colleagues were coming in, clearly feeling quite emotional about it, they were like, well, you know, we don't know how to handle that conversation. So I think there's a recognition that leaders have to respond to these social issues, because we all want them to. So there's kind of social pressure. But also, I think, you know, Ahmed talked about the, I suppose, kind of the business case, if you like, and that, you know, we can't separate this public and private, and that if leaders want high-performing teams, you have to create that sense of belonging, that sense of psychological safety. So I'm pleased to say that there's been a bit of a mindset shift from leaders in order to respond to that. Not quite there yet, but I think we've definitely started the journey.
Right. And Sheela, as a leader, how do you feel?
I think Dan's right. I think the topic of race and inequality in the workplace it's certainly not new. It's been an issue for so long, but up until now, if you as a racially diverse individual in a predominantly white-led organization have tried to raise your concerns or initiate some action, you more often than not will have been the sole voice. And so that probably won't have gotten you very far. You know, once or twice a year, an independent body or a journalist will write an article about the appallingly low number of BAME board members on UK FTSE 100 companies, and how these numbers haven't grown or have even shrunk, as was the case this past year. Or there'll be some data about the disparities and opportunities between ethnic minority and non-ethnic minority graduates, backed rightly by statistics. But up until now, even if solid data of this type has been available, as Dan said, it hasn't really had an impact on moving the dial as far as creating racial equality in the workplace goes. I think now, for the first time in a very long while, initiated by the events in the US and combined with the circumstances around a pandemic where you know, we have everybody's attention and promoted by social media, there is a really very huge collective voice, and it's a powerful voice, and it feels strength in the safety of its numbers. And in that safety, individuals are being very vocal about their experiences and the injustices around racial inequality that they feel they've experienced. And I mean, you only have to look at any social media platform and you will see individuals telling their stories, and some are being so bold as to call business leaders out when it comes to racial inequality. And so I think, you know, even if you just look at it from a reputational risk point of view, this is a very real and significant concern for many organisations and many UK leaders. And if it isn't, it really ought to be. And this is forcing them to engage. And it's not just the Black and ethnic minority communities that are airing their thoughts on the topic of inequality. Actually, it's every other group. It's women's groups, it's LGBTQ community and other groups feeling unequal treatment. And so that makes an even huger mass of voices, and I think that really can't be ignored.
And that actually will be what continues to drive this change. Actually, everybody coming together, allies, people sitting particular protected characteristics. Actually, we all need to stand up with one another and for one another, because otherwise nothing will really change. I should just say to all of the listeners that, you know, clearly we've got a lot of content we want to cover today with the panel, but please do put your questions in if you want to. I recognise it can be quite a sensitive subject for some, so actually all the 4 panellists have said if you would rather speak to them privately after the event, then just get in touch with Sarah Bradley or Helen Schwartzing, Page Executive, and they will put you in touch, because we know it can be very emotive and sometimes people don't want to publicly share, so we accept that. But if you are keen to ask questions of the panel, then please just do pop them on the chat function, and we will get to those as well. In the meantime, we will just carry on chatting. So what do we think then? Do we think it's different this time, Ahmed? What do you think?
Absolutely, it's different. It's making people talk about it, and as a result of that discussion, it's making society at large become very aware that racism is an everyday reality for people who suffer from it. And I think it's, if I can liken it to sexism, you know, sexism 10, 15 years ago was part of societal norms, and thinking has been accelerated. It's not just evolved, it's been accelerated, and it's much less tolerant today, unfortunately, though it still does exist, but it's much less tolerant. And I think the subject of racism is now going to have its own accelerated journey as well. I am an FD, so I couldn't go without giving you some stats. So it was interesting just reading in the Financial Times a couple of days ago, YouGov have done a poll since the events marking George Floyd's death. Black British people, and 2/3 of Black British people have had a racial slur used against them, or have had assumptions made about their behaviour because of their race. 3/4 have been asked, where are you from? I've had the privilege of that question many times myself, and I always love it when I answer Blackburn. More than half of people think their career development has been affected, and more than half have been racially abused in the workplace. Unfortunately, I can empathise with that again. And 2/3 of Black British people think there's a great deal of racism in society. Would that YouGov poll have occurred if the events in America did not happen? Probably not, but it's now getting the airtime, and it's now making leaders, business leaders and non-business leaders as well, just in wider society, think, okay, how do I tackle both my conscious and unconscious biases? So yes, Sheri, definitely it feels very different, and long may it continue to be so.
Sheri, can I jump in there?
Please do, yeah.
I think there's a couple of things to think about, actually. I think one of the things that I would say is, and Sheri, you know me well, and you know how old I am. I'm about to reveal my age, but I was around when Macpherson produced the report into the murder of Stephen Lawrence, and it was literally a watershed moment, actually, in UK politics. It was this, you know, we cannot continue as we are, obviously in that context in relation to the Metropolitan Police Service, but actually the concept of institutional racism very quickly became common language, and a lot of institutions, not just in the public sector but the private sector, really start to think about institutional racism. The fact is, 20 years ago, nothing has happened, actually, and I think we have to be really, really honest about that. I think what most organisations are doing at the moment is they are, quite frankly, just tinkering and tailoring around the edges. You know, Fiona said that, you know, now and again, you know, we'll get a report, you know, in the Guardian, or, you know, we'll get a survey. You know, these things are going to get us, quite frankly, nowhere. And I think that we have to be really honest about that, because otherwise we're going to go down a cul-de-sac. I think there's a couple of problems with this conversation, not this conversation here, but the conversation about race equality. One is the definition itself. So when people think about race and racism, they think of racism as this idea of being, you know, individual conscious intent. And that's problematic, because if you think of racism as individual conscious intent, that means that I, as an individual, consciously go out of my way and intend to discriminate someone based on their race. Now, most people are clearly going to be offended by that. Now, Ahmed's quotes were really interesting, because of course there are still people that are individually consciously racist, and we do have to deal with those as they emerge in society, but also outside of society. But the problem is, and it is a problem, is that modern day racism is institutional and is structural. So if we're going to deal with it, and this is the problem because it is complex, you know, we've got to have an honest conversation about how complex it is. You know, it starts in the education system, starts in society. And then what happens is in the workplace, organizational leaders say, well, we've opened the doors, but nobody's walking through. The talent is simply not there. And so I think if we're going to be honest and brave about this, we've got to say, okay, what can we do to tackle systemic racism in work, because it still happens in work, but also wider. And we've started to do that with gender, and we started to do that with issues of sexual orientation. And those things have not been easy and they've taken some time. But we can do it with race if we have the intention to do it. And I think that's important, actually, because if we're hiding constantly behind, I'm not racist, and if we're hiding behind, we operate on a process of equal opportunities, which most organizations do, well, that's just not going to work because it's, you know, life is more complex than that.
And can I just add a couple of things as well? So to Dan's points and all the points really is, and I like this phrase, you know, we've opened the doors, but we haven't really opened the doors. We've just got the door ajar. Yeah. Because if the doors were truly open, we wouldn't be here. The challenge that, you know, to expand on some of Dan's points is that we, from a workplace point of view, we say, look, you know what, we have opened the doors, we understand. But really, if I went to, and still do this now, I go to a number of leaders, a number of CEOs, they're not even aware of some of this great data. They're not even aware of the reports that are out there. So there's a lack of understanding, really, of even knowing what the true landscape is really all about. The other piece then is, you know, is that intent, because if you do not believe that there is a problem, then you're not going to do anything about it. And when individuals are sharing their stories and experiences, and if you think about some of the processes and systems that we have in our workplaces, like our grievance process, for example, you know, when people are sharing their stories, it comes from a place of disbelief, because I've never experienced it before. So therefore, you're telling me your story. This couldn't possibly happen here. We're not racist at all. So to Dan's point, you know, we're not racist. It's not a problem. So you're the problem. You become the problem, even though I'm sharing my lived true experience of what's happened or happening around me in the organisation. So there is a piece around how we take a look at the systems and the processes that we have, but also the roles that we have within, because regardless of everything, it is people that interpret processes, it is people that execute talent, it is people that hire, it is people that do all these things. And every time we get to something around race, we then get to, well, we can't do that, you know, there's no talent out there, we can't hire, we can't ask for X amount of, you know, diverse talent for BME people. Of course you can, because if you are underrepresented, you can legally, quite absolutely, shout for and increase in your narrative that this is for, we are underrepresented here for BAME individuals, and so we encourage the applications. From a recruitment point of view, I would add about this other piece, which is so important, is that we as recruiters, and I'm talking about the collective family of we, and to the listeners, need to really understand that recruitment process end to end and ensure that is inclusive and accessible to everyone in each component. So what are the conversations that are had as soon as somebody says, I'm looking to hire? Do we just go, oh, okay then, off we toodle pip, or do we actually have a conversation with the person that's wanting to hire around, well, what is your current diversity policy? Do we challenge it? Do we actually demonstrate our awareness, our biases, to help the people that are wanting to hire to actually have diversity across the recruitment process, etc., etc. But I think that for me, the whole George Floyd momentum has enabled people to speak up freely now more than they have ever done before around the very same things that we're talking about, and shoving things under the noses of leaders to say, have you read this? Oh, you know, you've signed up to this as well, Mr. or Mrs. CEO. So where's the action that's going with it? It's really making people hold now organisations to account and to drive action.
And actually,
sorry about waffly bit, but
and actually it's a beautiful segue, Fiona, into a couple of questions that have come in from the audience, which is around recruitment and positive discrimination and what can be done to improve racial diversity in businesses. So how can organisations positively discriminate in their recruitment for Black people and other ethnic minorities? People I've heard have said, well, you can't do that. So I'd like to know how we can do it with legal ruling recommendations, HR recommendations, and companies with useful policy examples. I'll just read the next questions as well, because they're linked. My organisation doesn't recruit people of colour in anything like numbers it should or could. Does the panel have any tips on how we can be better? Who'd like to take that one?
Can I have a go, Sheri? I think if you're saying that you know, you don't understand where you should be looking for those ethnically or racially diverse individuals, you're really not casting your net wide enough. Plenty of those organisations out there exist, but going back to what Fiona and Dan were saying earlier, you need to look at your recruitment process. And if you are predominantly recruiting for people who got a first and a 2-1 from Oxford and Cambridge and look like you, and that happens to be white and male, well then you're not going to find, you know, those individuals. But you also have to look at your culture, the culture of your organization. If the culture of your organization is not a culture that welcomes inclusivity, then even when those candidates, those racially diverse candidates are there, they're not going to want to come to work for you. Why should they? Over the years that I've been in COO roles, I've heard individuals, colleagues, people from other firms say that, you know, even when we do manage to recruit racially diverse individuals, they don't stay. This is true. On average, racially diverse individuals are 30% more likely to leave the firm that they're working for within a year or two and go somewhere else. But I think you're asking.
Well, we're losing Sheela a little bit there.
Wrong question, because I think a lot of firms seem to think that, oh well, we've invested in these people, and you know, we did everything we could, and then.
Sheela, I'm going to come back to you because we're having a couple of problems with your Wi-Fi. Ahmed, you were nodding furiously there. Would you like to come in as well?
I was nodding furiously. Well observed. I absolutely agree with everything Sheela said. I don't think it's that simplistic. I know some firms are talking about setting targets at a senior level. It's not as simplistic as setting targets, although that's a great visionary statement. It is about recruitment process and having a diverse array of candidates from all minority groups. It's about setting up forums and networks within the organization to encourage discussion and debate and allow people to express whether they are feeling included or not. It's not just about race, it's about social mobility, and it's about inclusion. It's about training conscious and unconscious biases. We all of us, including us on this panel, have unconscious biases, and there are training programs out there which can highlight and bring forth those unconscious biases we may have. So there are significant number of ways in which organizations can look to improve their diversity and the look and feel of their workplace, which would only be a positive thing.
Yeah,
and just to
comment earlier. Yeah.
Oh, go on, Sheri.
Oh no, I was actually going to bring back your comment from earlier about the process being inclusive from beginning to end. You know, it's not just to say, oh, actually, you know, at this stage there will be a diverse interview panel. It starts right at the beginning, doesn't it? It's your language here, it's the experience, it's the micro inclusions, it's everything.
Exactly, absolutely, absolutely. And just to add some more context to this question around, you know, how can we do that? You know, you've really got to understand your company and understand, you know, your data and where you've got, you know, underrepresentation. Like I said, to be able to say, you know, the law says that where you have underrepresentation, you can advertise to say we need more of X, legally done, end of. So the piece for me is back to this other piece, which is you've then got to ensure that where that person is going through from job evaluation to interview to selection, that process is fair all the way through. And that the people, I know I keep saying this, but it's so important, the people that are making the decisions in each of those elements have, to Ahmed's point, you know, they are aware of their biases and how to take action against those biases. Not enough just to be aware, it's I'm aware of it, and how am I now judging this person on their capability or on the bias that I have around their colour, around their gender, around their sexual orientation. Because if I am, then there's something to be done about this person here as opposed to the candidate who sat in all of those elements. It's really important that the people that are making those decisions in each of those areas really get it, because what we'll get back a lot the other way is, but you've got to do it on merit. You know, we can't just be putting people in there just because of the colour of the skin or because they're female. No, I completely agree. But you know what would be really great is if they're included in the first place and there was a level playing field, that the job description, you know, I look at a lot of job descriptions and quite frankly, a lot of them are terrible. Some are like War and Peace. Some are even saying, you know, what we actually desire and what are the essentials. Some of them are putting things in there. They're asking for, you know, you need to have worked X amount of years in the Home Office or wherever. Well, if that's going to happen, you're going to knock out lots of people. You're knocking out lots of talent already. So what we should be doing is, before we even look at how we advertise and who we, you know, are not including or excluding, we need to look at what are we actually saying as an organisation? What are we saying about the culture when we put these things down in our adverts, so that when people do come into Sheila's point, that they then actually stay? Because quite frankly, we could get lots of people working in any organisation, but actually if the talent that walks through the door isn't being tapped into, if it's not being supported, if it's not being valued, they're just going to just go, you know, because like I said, then you end up in another pool which is around talent. What do we mean by talent? How do we define it? Do we put people in boxes, not tell them they're in a box, you know, and all these bright sparks up here get all the love and attention, and all these other people? I mean, we look at the shape of organisations today, we cannot argue that the way that organisations look, it looks a certain pattern across UK PLC. And the question is, why? What are the systems that are driving that to happen? And one of those big things is how we look at talent and how we move people and perceive people to be.
There's another comment here about training. When you touched on lived experiences before, Fiona, there's a comment from the audience which is lived experiences tend to be ignored. Do you feel that the training that is currently available is sufficient? If not, there you go, sounding no. How do we address that then?
To understand, you cannot train somebody on lived experiences. And feel free, panelists, to correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know any program out there that says, here's a training program that talks about lived experiences. Lived experiences are real. Lived experiences come from everybody who are operating in that organisation. And the only training that will exist is when you talk to your people. It's when you get to know people. As leaders, as people leaders, we need to know who our people are, really understand their motivations and aspirations. But we need to also understand those experiences, because trust me, those experiences will absolutely tell you the answer to the issues and challenges in your organisation, why people aren't progressing, why people are, they might say, well, I get this banter in the office, I don't really like it, I feel really uncomfortable. So I won't call it a training per se. What I will be looking at here is, how do we initiate a program of conversation, of listening, understanding, that happens continuously throughout the organisation for everybody, that really helps people to amplify their voices and their stories for action to follow. No point in listening, not going to do anything with it.
Sheila, you wanted to
I don't know what the other panellists think on that.
Thanks, Fiona.
I was actually just going to make a point on the last topic of discussion, which was about inclusion and when cultures are not inclusive cultures. I was recently contacted by a recruiter who said to me, you know, I've got a number of clients, they are very homogeneous in that they're very white and male, and I've tried to convince this client, show them some CVs of ethnically diverse individuals, and how do I convince them to get these to take these candidates? And you know, my response was outstandingly, absolutely do not, because what you're doing when you're putting individuals in cultures that are not geared towards inclusion and accepting each individual for what they are, you're setting those individuals up for failure. So please don't do that.
And actually, there's a couple of people who've come in commenting about exactly that. I think businesses sometimes don't recognise the holistic approach of an organisation to really change the diversity representation within an organisation. It's not just enough to say, oh, we want to hire more racial diversity. It's about, well, what will their employee experience be? Not just through the interview process, but once they walk through the door as an employee until the day they go. It's so much deeper than that, isn't it? A couple of comments.
Yeah.
Sheila, I'm going to just stay with you if I may. Sheila has said that when recruiting, we should widen the net as there are organisations out there that we should reach out to when doing so. Can you give examples of those organisations, please?
Oh goodness, there are a myriad of organisations. I'm sure Fiona can support me here if I try to think of them. If you want to contact me on LinkedIn, whoever that is, I'd be very happy to help you out. But I think it depends very much on the level at which you're recruiting. A non-profit organisation that I work very closely with is an organisation called SEO London, Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. And I've worked with them in getting young, talented individuals from low socioeconomic backgrounds or ethnic minority backgrounds. They're super smart individuals. And there is a reason that they are drawn towards an organisation like this, because they don't see their opportunities in going through the normal pathways. So if you're looking to recruit at the junior level, consider SEO London. It's a fantastic organisation.
And what I would add, oh, go on, Dan.
Well, we did last year. We actually did a very big audit on race for a large, I won't name them actually, but a large government department, and they were seeking to hire BME candidates quite senior level. And you can do all the kind of mechanical stuff, as like Fiona said, and you've got to make sure all the job descriptions and stuff like that are as they should be, taking out the criteria which might screen people out. But that's kind of stage one. And then stage two is you've got to be really proactive. So it was literally connecting to Stephen Lawrence Foundation, Elevation Networks, all of those BME organizations out there. And actually the thing is, and this is the interesting thing, is most of those organizations will be more than happy to work with government departments and private companies. The cost of doing so is very minimum actually, but they really can help to kind of expand your network. And I think what it's about is most organizations don't even know the makeup of the BME voluntary sector and other kind of BME stakeholders out there. So you've got to know who's out there in order to connect with them. And I have to say the project that we worked on had such an amazing success in terms of number of applications and appointments. It's relatively easy to do. You've just got to lean in and make an effort to do it.
And can I just add something on that, which is absolutely spot on. And there's another thing to add on to. I think the two need to happen together. So on top of Dan's and Sheila's point, a lot of organisations will rely on the reaching out. But you know what's even better is inviting people in. Because the biggest challenge that for a lot of, and I do hate this phrase, but I use it for now, for BAME individuals is we don't even know that you exist as a company sometimes. We don't even know if I walk through the door that I would actually be welcomed there. I don't even know what it would look like. I don't know if other people that's like me that's in there. And what we do sometimes, we very reach out, but not really being in opening our doors to let them in from a youngster's point of view, from traineeships, apprenticeships, through to senior hires. We have to be open. And this goes back to this whole inclusion bit, because when you open your doors and so let's just say, for example, you said, right, what I want to do is, if you've got networks in your organization, or you have career development insight days into your company, you push that out, whether that's across LinkedIn, whether it's across different social media, they will come, because they will be looking to go, actually, I never even knew they did that. You're building your brand, you're showing your visibility. That's how you start to build your pipeline. So if you do the two in parallel, trust me, they will come. So when I used to work at HSBC, and we used to have lots of different partners, what we did was, and she did confirm, all those SEO young talent, amazing. You invited them in, they knew more than I did. It was like, wow, this talent is out there. But if you do not open your doors, they will always see it as it's a closed organization. We need to remove some of the myths and fear that a lot of BAME individuals have around some of these organizations, because they don't even see themselves in there in the first place. And they'll walk in and they'll be like, well, I didn't even know you had BAME employees here. But what's even better is, then goes back to the other point, is then seeing people that move up. Because what they don't want to be seeing is, well, if I come through the door, you hire me, but all I'm speaking to is a group of people that are still stuck at this level. That's just not going to wash. So it is about that meaningful change, to someone's question here, that is measurable by the movement upwards into senior roles. It needs to be done a lot more faster than what it is being done at the moment, but invite people in.
Ahmed, I'm going to bring you in here if I may, because actually leading on from Fiona's comment there is a question that's come in around what advice could you offer to make a meaningful difference to practically addressing unconscious bias? This individual's organisation does have good racial diversity at ground level, but none by the time you get to middle management. What's your view there?
Yeah, I think a lot of this has already been said, and the first step, as Fiona's quite rightly stressed, is just to talk about it. Talk about what it means to be part of a minority group and how you feel in being part of the organization. Secondly, and more practically then, I think we should have mentoring programs, coaching programs to ensure that talent that's coming in at the ground level is groomed and mentored upwards, so that actually we do have appropriate representation at senior level. Because absolutely, as Fiona says, we might have representation at more junior or middle management levels. We don't have anywhere near enough at top level. I think someone told me the other day, FTSE 100 directors, 6% of FTSE 100 directors will be classed as minority ethnic. And if you take away all the minority ethnic directors who are actually from overseas, so international directors who come into the UK to be a non-exec, actually it's only 2% of British-born ethnic minority directors occupy seats on the FTSE 100. Not acceptable. So put training programs in place, put coaching and mentoring programs in place, actively talk about it, and I think that's the most important thing, and the talent will flow upwards. Always a point on talent first and foremost, but yes, diversity is fantastic. And to stress Sheila's point, it will then become an organization that looks to anyone looking in as an organization that is inclusive and welcomes diversity, and then you'll get more talent in.
And I think something you don't have, even when there isn't a representation at the top, you can still bring people into the room.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not that the door's closed, once you're in that group that only those people are allowed. You can constantly interchange groups and people and bring in new voices, and people need to, I think, be much more open to that. Yes, Fiona?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that goes back to, again, to Sheila's point about the culture, because the culture will only be able to do that if our leaders are, and that's not just leaders at C-suite level, it's just all of us, or, leaders in the organization who are thinking about who isn't around the table. A lot of organizations are very hierarchical. It's only leaders who are leaders know all the answers, and therefore anybody else around this table who doesn't look like us, think like us, are not wanted. We've got to create environment and create that culture that invites people in, that says, you know what, we don't actually, there's no point in having a conversation about me if there's nobody around that table that looks like me. How can anybody make a decision? How can anybody do that when there's no one around that table that represents me? There's no one around that table that represents my function. There's no one around that table of blah, 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 blah. And I think the unconscious bias piece is all well and good at this level here at the bottom, but clearly what's happening is we hit another barrier when we move from junior level to senior level. And this is when the challenge is increasing, because again, the culture in the organization may be one that says, actually, what we want is people that speak a certain way, look a certain way, act a certain way, that's really like Bob. We want someone that's like Bob over there. Bob does things this way, so we need to create more Bobs and we need to create more Janets. You know, it's just not going to happen, because what we're doing is suppressing individual talent because we are trying to put them in a box that will never ever fit. It's like me wearing a jumper that's 19 sizes too small, but then everyone's telling me, you know, well, you know, you need to communicate more, you need to do this better. And I'm trying to get, like, I can't, because that's not me, because you wanted me to be you and I'm not you. So, you know, it's just, what we do need to do is remove these barriers, and those barriers are fundamentally, when we get to the senior levels, that's when we start talking about succession, that's when we start talking about promotions, and it's those people that are making those decisions. What do we mean when we talk about talent? What do we mean when we talk about professionalism? People will have their own image, because it's very subjective as to what that means. And what that means for lots of people is you do not fit our cultural norm, that not only knocks out BAME individuals, it will knock out any minority group, because the cultural norm probably that strong that it means, well, none of us aren't going to fit in there, because you see it as Bob, you know, and we're not Bob, for want of a better example.
Sheila, to you on this one. So question here is, some of my black colleagues have said to me, this is not my problem to fix. And right now, I don't want to put my head up. It's not a new problem. It's not a new thing. It's been like this for ages. People want to see real meaningful change. What meaningful change looks like. I believe it must be black people in positions of power demonstrating systemic change.
But how many black people in positions of power are there? And just to assume that because somebody is racially diverse, that they want to be talking about this. No, racially diverse individuals are as broad as every other individual.
Yeah.
I can think myriad of reasons why a racially diverse individual would not want to speak on this topic. You know, fear of judgment. They may.
Oh, losing her again. Sheila, I'm losing you. Dan, yeah, do you want to carry on that? Sorry, Sheila.
I think you can't say. I think it's just a crazy idea to say that basically let's put the problem on all the black people to fix. It's just the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. I think the power relations rely with white people. It's the same with homophobia. It's like saying to the gay people, you guys fix the problem. Well, we can't, because we don't have the power. And I think actually what we need is we don't need more black leaders supporting race equality. We need more white leaders, you know, addressing all the issues that everyone's talking about. So we need white leaders really being allies, and we need white leaders saying, this is important to me. This is important to me on a personal level, and this is important to my business. And then some of those points that, you know, Sheila was making, you know, this is important in terms of what is the culture that I want to, you know, develop, and what is the culture that I want to role model? How can I make sure that I create a sense of belonging and true inclusivity in terms of my behavior? So I think we've got to, and actually in order to, you know, really be honest about this, you know, we've got to have conversations about things like white privilege and the rest of it. I mean, you know, you do get a lot of people in organizations. I mean, we get this all the time, you know, basically straight white guys saying, well, where's the straight white guy network? And it's just like, look around the room. It's so present. Well, the irony is it's so present, it actually becomes invisible. You know, that's fiction. The only thing I would add as well, which I think is important, is I know Ahmed talked about mentoring. I'm going to be slightly skeptical on Ahmed, actually, only because, you know, mentoring actually is not new. mentoring has been around for 25 years. They've been doing mentoring in the US for 40 years. It doesn't work. Mentoring is a sticking plaster to the issues. We have got some models of things that do work. If you look at gender diversity and gender inclusion over the last 10 years only, we've seen amazing success. Why is that? Because we have policy frameworks around them, but more importantly, we have accountability frameworks. So things like gender pay reporting has put a real spotlight on the pipeline. That's important. I'm not really a fan of quotas, but I am definitely a fan of the principle of what gets measured gets done, because we know that if organizations have public accountability moves much more towards action. So I do really think it is the time for organizations to have strong public, let's call them targets on race. Why would we not want to do that? We have targets in business about all sorts of things. So why would we not want to have targets around diversity if we think, and we do, that diversity is a business issue, which it is. But at the moment, we're playing around the edges, and unless we get white leaders to role model and have some accountability through targets, I'm really not convinced we're going to get anything done.
We're coming to our last 5 minutes, so I'm just going to do a really quick fire question round to each of you individually. Ahmed, what's your view on the term BAME?
I saw that question. Yes, it's far too broad, but I'm not going to get hung up on semantics personally. It's a term. Let's keep talking. If we came up with a different term, that wouldn't quite tick all the boxes either. So it is what it is, in my view. And the more important thing is to carry on talking about ethnicity and minority groups.
Right. Fiona, so we talked before we started today about getting started. If somebody was right at the beginning, what would be their first step to take to get started?
I think very quickly they need to create the safe space to bring colleagues of both, you know, BAME, non-BAME together to understand the stories, the experiences. Then that will link into support, because then you're showing your visible support, understanding then what needs to be done from those. But to Dan's point, the last thing I would say is about action, because for me, it's about recognizing your privilege, and I'm talking privilege in terms of my power position in the organization and how I can dismantle the very same barriers that are causing challenges and issues, and understanding how I can use my position to drive change and action.
Lovely. Sheela, going back to the inclusivity question, because there's been quite a lot that's come up on the thread about people asking that. How do you display your inclusivity of your organisation right out so that you are in ability to attract the diverse candidates in the first place?
Check your culture. Check your culture, identify your biases, and then deal with those biases.
Super, thank you. And Dan, how do people be a good ally?
I think, as all the panelists are saying, I think just talk about it. I think the only thing I would say is don't be afraid to make mistakes. It is difficult, it's not easy. But a good ally is somebody that says, do you know what? I'm just going to have to step into it. I'm going to be brave. It might be a bit scary. I don't have all of the answers. But what I am going to do is I'm going to say it's important for me. I'm going to call stuff out when things need calling out. And more importantly, I'm going to have real human, long-term. I think Fiona's point is really important, actually, around that stuff around training and what works. I mean, some training does work, actually. And Fiona's point is really key around the constant conversation. And I think a good ally is not somebody that has a coffee once and that's it. I think a good ally is the constant dialogue, the constant learning, the constant talking up. And then I think they get more confidence, and then just going from there, really.
Yeah, there's another question here, but this I think is coming in everything that we've already talked about. Said about bringing attention, awareness to the issue, but what are the thoughts on practical things that help this issue progress positively? But it's everything you've all said.
Everything was said.
Think about it. It's listening. It's not making any assumptions. It's coming together. It's learning from the steps you take, isn't it? You know, I think we all know you don't get everything right straight away. You know, we're all constantly learning, and as long as you're bringing all of the voices into the room, then actually you've got a good spread of input to really make.
Yeah, and I think it's about having a starting point of a bit of humility and vulnerability. You know, I think that's really important, and actually it transcends from the protected characteristics. And to Dan's point, and we cannot escape this. This is what we're talking about here, is human to human. We're just people, you know, and we keep shoving people in boxes. And when we shove people in boxes, we make things really complicated. But if you just strip all that away and just understand that everyone is individual in their own unique way. And actually, if we get to understand and know our people on a human to human level and start to see things from a human to human level, it will make life a lot easier. Sounds a bit rosy, but it's true.
1 minute to go. To everybody who asked questions, I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to get to them all. I did, do the best I could. So what we'll do is we will put the questions to our panel. We will put a document together and get you some answers. So please don't worry if we haven't been able to deal with them directly on the webinar today. Ahmed, Fiona, Sheila, Dan, you have all been outstanding. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you to Page Executive and VERCIDA for putting it on. And thanks to the nearly 300 of you who dialed in today. Thanks for listening. Wow. And let's keep talking about race. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.